Hi friends, you may think you know the clash of empires at Gaugamela, the dust-choked fury where Alexander's Phalanx met the Persian tide. But have you ever wondered what it felt like from the ground's gentle sway through the wide, unblinking eyes of a war elephant born in the misty wilds of ancient India, a creature whose trunk brushed the same earth that trembled under chariot wheels, whose ears caught the whispers of kings long before the horns of battle blew? Welcome to the Animal Historian, where we wander the quiet paths of animal history through sleep stories that cradle you into the past. I invite you to rest, relax, and let this tale carry you away on the slow rhythm of memory. If you enjoy these journeys, please remember to like this video and subscribe to the channel. I'd also love to know where you're listening from tonight. Share it in the comments below. And tell me which animal story you'd like to hear next. Your ideas inspire the next adventures. Tonight, settle in with a blanket, dim the lights, and let my voice guide you back to 331 BCE, to the heart of a battle that reshaped the world. Close your eyes and imagine the world as it was in those early days of my life. Around the year 350 BCE, when the sun rose like a golden thread over the endless green of India's heart, I was born not in the clamor of courts or the forge of human ambition, but in the quiet embrace of the jungle, where the air hung heavy with the scent of wet earth and blooming lotuses along the banks of the great Ganges River. My mother, a towering matriarch with tusks curved like the crescent moon, had chosen this hidden glade, a place where the undergrowth parted like a secret shared only with the wind. I remember the warmth of her side pressing against me as I took my first unsteady steps, my tiny trunk questing for the milky comfort that tasted of wild grasses and river silt. In those first tender moons, life unfolded in a rhythm as steady as the monsoon rains. Our herd moved like shadows through the sal forests, their trunks broad as ancient pillars, leaves whispering secrets overhead in a language of rustles and sighs. I was the smallest, a gray wisp among giants, my skin still soft and dusted with the fine red earth that clung to us all. The smells were my first teachers, the sharp tang of crushed cardamom pods underfoot, the musky perfume of my mother's hide after a dust bath in the riverbed, the faint, salty whisper of the distant sea carried on the breeze from the Bay of Bengal, and the sounds, oh, how they lulled me into sleep even then, the deep, resonant calls of my aunts echoing through the mist at dawn, like the earth's own heartbeat, the chatter of langurs in the high branches, their leaps a playful counterpoint to our ponderous gait, the gentle lap of the Ganges against smooth pebbles, inviting us to wade in and cool our flanks under the midday sun. We were a family bound by touch as much as blood. My mother's trunk would curl around me protectively when storms rolled in from the east, her breath warm against my ear as lightning flickered like fireflies in the canopy. She taught me the ways of the wild without words, how to strip bark from a young bamboo shoot with a precise twist of the trunk, savoring the fibrous sweetness that burst like fresh rain on the tongue. How to listen for the subtle shift in the wind that warned of a tiger's prowl, that striped ghost whose eyes gleamed amber in the twilight. I never feared the jungle's dangers in those days. Fear was a human shadow, not yet cast over my world. Instead, there was only the soothing cycle, graze in the open meadows at dawn, where the grass was dewy and alive with the hum of crickets. Wallow in the mud pools by noon, the cool slime coating our hides like a second skin, warding off the sun's insistent gaze. And at dusk, gather in a circle under the stars, trunks entwined in quiet communion as the fireflies danced like fallen sparks from the god's own forge. But even in that paradise, the world of men began to intrude, soft as a footprint in the loam. The Ganges Valley was no untouched Eden. It pulsed with the rise of kingdoms whose names would echo through time. The Nanda Empire, rulers of Magadha, whose palaces of polished stone gleamed like jewels along the river's curve. I did not know their names then, little one that I was, but I felt their presence in the changed air. One morning, as our herd ambled toward a favored watering hole near the city of Pataliputra, that sprawling hub of brick and bustle, founded by wise King Ajatashatru a century before, I caught my first whiff of smoke from human fires, acrid and layered with the spice of cumin and ghee. It mingled uneasily with the jungle's breath, a harbinger of the ordered world beyond the trees. It was there, by the water's edge, that I first saw them, men with skin darkened by the sun, their bodies draped in simple dhotis of woven cotton, carrying spears tipped with iron that glinted like serpent fangs. They were hunters, gatherers of the wild for their lords, the Maharajas who commanded vast armies and dreamed of conquest. In the Nanda realm, elephants like my kin were already more than beasts. We were symbols of the earth's might, harnessed in rituals and rites. A secret few whisper even today, drawn from the faded scrolls of ancient Sanskrit texts, like the Arthashastra by Chanakya. Though he would not pen it for another generation, we were the guardians of royal processions, our howdahs laden with priests chanting Vedic hymns under canopies of silk. But not all encounters were sacred. These men sought the young and the strong for tribute, for the distant empire to the west that hungered for our power, the Achaemenids of Persia, whose great King Darius I had first tasted Indian might when he crushed the Pauravas in 518 BCE, claiming 20 talents of gold dust and herds of us as spoils. I remember the day it began to change for me. The air grew thick with the scent of unfamiliar herbs crushed under the feet of a scouting party. They moved quietly, these men, their eyes sharp as they noted the size of our bulls, the curve of tusks that could uproot a teak tree in a single heave. My mother sensed it first. Her ears flared wide, fanning the air like great sails, catching the foreign tang of their oiled skin and leather quivers. She trumpeted low, a warning that vibrated through my bones like the roll of distant drums, and we turned as one, melting back into the thicker woods. But the jungle, for all its embrace, could not hide us forever. In the quiet hours after dusk, when the moon hung low and silver over the Ganges, I would hear their fires crackling on the far bank, soft pops like seeds in a pan, and wonder at the stories they told, tales of a far-off king named Artaxerxes who ruled from golden thrones in Persepolis, demanding elephants as tribute to parade before his immortals. As seasons turned, my body grew with the land's abundance. By my 3rd year, I stood nearly as tall as my mother's shoulder, my trunk lengthening like a river, finding its course. Adept at plucking mangoes from the highest boughs, their juice bursting sweet and sticky against my palate. We roamed wider now, skirting the edges of human domains, where rice paddies stretched like green mirrors under the sun, tended by bent figures in turbans, who sang work songs that floated on the breeze, melodies of rice and rain, of bountiful harvests offered to Varuna, the god of waters. One such field, near the ancient city of Taxila, that crossroads of scholars and spices, where Greek envoys would later whisper of Aristotle's stars, I paused to graze, my trunk delving into the tender shoots. It was there that I first tasted the bitterness of change, a sharp twang of salt from the earth mingled with the faint metallic bite of plows that had scarred the soil. The men came at twilight, not with spears, but with cunning. This is a hidden thread in the tapestry of animal history, one seldom unraveled in the grand chronicles of kings, the art of capture, passed down through generations of Indian tamers, as described in lost fragments of the Mahabharata's battle lore and echoed in Persian reliefs at Naqsh-e-Rustam. They did not charge. No, they lured. A young cow elephant, separated from her kin by clever herders, was led into a hidden stockade of woven bamboo and sharpened stakes, her calls a heartbreaking bellow that pulled at my mother's resolve. We followed, drawn by instinct, into a clearing ringed by torches that flickered like malevolent eyes. Ropes of tough choir fiber, scented with the calming musk of female elephants in musk, snaked from the trees, drugged with roots of the Sarah plant, whose sedative haze could quiet even the wildest heart. I was young, curious, my trunk reaching out to touch the strange scents before wisdom could stay me. A loop caught my ankle, soft as a vine at first, then tightening with the pull of hidden hands. Panic bloomed in me then, a hot flutter in my chest, but it was fleeting. The air grew heavy with the drug's embrace, and I sank to my knees in the mud, the world blurring to a gentle haze of green and gold. My mother roared once, a sound that shook the leaves from the branches, before she too was ensnared, her great form collapsing like a felled tree beside me. The men moved in shadows, murmuring in a dialect of Prakrit, their voices a soothing cadence. Shanti, Shanti, peace, great one. They worked with reverence, not cruelty, for in India we were Indra's mounts, divine thunder in flesh, binding us with padded harnesses, feeding us tender bananas, laced with more of the calming root. Days blurred into a dream-like march. We were led eastward at first, away from the Ganges' familiar curve, toward the training grounds of the Nanda stables near the Vindhya hills, vast compounds of thatched roofs and earthen walls, where the air thrummed with the low rumbles of hundreds like us. Here, in the hush of dawn, I learned the first lessons of submission. The Mahout, a wiry man named Kavi, with hands calloused like river stones, who climbed my back with murmurs and strokes, his scent of turmeric and sweat becoming as familiar as my own. He taught me to kneel at a whistle, to follow the prod of a hooked ankush, not in pain, but in the patient rhythm of trust, like a mother guiding her calf to water. Yet even in captivity, the jungle's whispers lingered. At night, under a sky stitched with stars that wheeled like the spokes of Vishnu's chariot, I would hear the free herds calling from the distant hills, their trumpets a lullaby of what was lost. And in the stable's dim light, amid the hay-sweet breath of my fellows, Kavi would share fragments of the wider world, tales of the great Western king, Artaxerxes III, who had slain his own kin to claim the throne in 338 BCE, and now demanded our kind as tribute to bolster his armies against restless satraps, a secret buried in the clay tablets of Babylonian scribes, unearthed only in modern digs. The Persians had smuggled in mahouts from the Indus, blending Indian lore with Zoroastrian rites, anointing our hides with saffron oil before parades to invoke Ahura Mazda's favor. Life settled into this new cadence, the soft thud of hooves on packed earth, the splash of baths in stone troughs fed by mountain streams, the evening gongs that called us to feed on bundles of bamboo and millet cake, their crunch a comfort in the cooling air. I grew strong, my tusks lengthening like promises unspoken, and Kavi's voice became my anchor. His songs of the Rigveda, chanted low, weaving spells of calm that eased the ache of lost wilds. But as the years softened into 340 BCE, rumors stirred, even in our enclosure, whispers of a young conqueror from the west, a lion cub named Alexander, whose shadow lengthened over the Hellespont. The Nandas, sensing the winds of tribute, prepared shipments to Persepolis, and I felt the pull of greater journeys in the salt-laced breezes from the sea. It was a peace woven from routine, yet fragile as morning mist, for soon the call of the great king would draw me across mountains and deserts into a world of gold and iron, where elephants like me became the thunder of empires. But that awakening, it came with the first caravan's horns, echoing like fate's own breath. Let your breath slow as you follow me now, away from the lush cradle of the Ganges, into the vast and whispering unknown of 340 BCE. The jungle's green embrace had faded, its sense of wet earth and lotus replaced by the sharp, dry tang of dust and sun-baked stone. I was no longer the wobbly calf of the forest, but a young bull elephant, my shoulders broad as a banyan trunk, my tusks beginning to curve like the scythes of the moon. My name, given by Kavi, my mahout, was Indra. The journey that began in the Nanda stables would carry me across mountains and rivers to the heart of the Achaemenid Empire, where the great king waited in his city of gold. Close your eyes and let the rhythm of my steps, slow, deliberate, heavy as memory, carry you along the ancient roads. The caravan came for us at dawn, as the first light painted the Vindhya hills in hues of amber and rose. The air was cool then, carrying the faint sweetness of jaggery and the smoky bite of campfires doused with water. I stood among a dozen of my kin, our hides brushed with turmeric paste, a ritual to bless our passage, its earthy scent clinging to my skin like a second hide. Kavi stood at my side, his hands steady as he adjusted the padded ropes around my neck, their fibers woven with threads of saffron that caught the light like embers. The Nanda court had decreed us a gift to Artaxerxes III, the Persian king whose name was spoken in hushed tones, as if his shadow could summon storms. The Arthashastra, that secret manual of statecraft, penned later by Chanakya, hints at such tributes. Elephants, prized above gold, were sent to cement alliances or appease distant lords. But another truth, buried in the cuneiform records of Persepolis' treasury, tells a quieter story, one few know even now. The Nandas sent not just us, but our mahouts, trained to whisper commands in Prakrit, their voices a bridge between India's wilds and Persia's courts, ensuring we would obey under foreign skies. The road west was a tapestry of scents and sounds, each mile a new verse in a song I was only beginning to learn. We left Pataliputra's bustling markets, where the air thrummed with the clatter of ox carts and the cries of merchants hawking silks dyed with indigo and madder root. the Ganges faded behind us, its muddy embrace replaced by the rocky paths of the Khyber Pass, where the wind howled like a grieving jackal, carrying the faint musk of ibex and the bitter edge of pine resin from the Hindu Kush. My feet, broad as shields, pressed into the earth, kicking up clouds of red dust that settled on my back, gritty against the turmeric's softness. The caravan stretched long and sinuous, a line of camels laden with cedar chests, their humps swaying like dunes, of horses with arched necks, their hooves clicking on stone, and of us, the elephants, our steps a slow drumbeat that echoed through the valleys. Each dawn, Kavi would wake me with a low hum, a melody from his village that spoke of rice fields and monsoon rains. He'd offer me a handful of pressed millet cakes, their grainy sweetness bursting against my tongue, and I'd curl my trunk around his arm, feeling the warmth of his skin, the pulse of a bond that softened the ache of my lost herd. The other mahouts, too, sang to their charges, songs and dialects of Magadha and Gandhara, weaving tales of ancient kings like Bimbisara, who had tamed the wilds with wisdom before the Nandas rose. At night, we rested in clearings ringed by torchlight, the flames casting shadows that danced like spirits on the cliffs. I'd listen to the men's voices, low and rhythmic, as they shared stories around fires scented with sandalwood and dried dung. One tale, whispered in the quiet hours, spoke of a hidden pact. The satrap of Gandhara, Bessus, had secretly doubled the tribute of elephants to Artaxerxes to curry favor, a move unrecorded in Greek annals, but etched in the clay tablets of Susa, later uncovered by archaeologists in the 20th century. It was why our caravan grew, more of my kin joining us at Taxila, their trunks raised in wary greeting as we merged into a single, lumbering host. The journey stretched across seasons, each landscape a new brushstroke on my senses. In the plains of the Punjab, the air was heavy with the perfume of mustard fields, their yellow blooms swaying like a sea under the sun. I'd pluck bundles of their tender leaves with my trunk, savoring the peppery bite, while Kavi laughed softly, his ankush tapping my flank to urge me onward. Beyond the Indus River, where we forded shallow channels that swirled cool around my legs, the land grew harsher, arid plateaus where the earth cracked like old leather and the wind carried the faint, metallic scent of hematite from distant mines. Here, the men draped us in blankets woven with geometric patterns, dyed red and ochre to shield us from the sun's relentless gaze. I felt their weight, heavy yet comforting, like the embrace of my mother's shadow in the jungle long ago. But not all was calm. In the passes of Bactria, where the mountains loomed like silent sentinels, we faced ambushes, not by armies, but by bandits who coveted the caravan's wealth. One twilight, as the sky bled crimson, arrows hissed from the cliffs, their flint tips glinting like fireflies. The men shouted, their voices sharp with fear, and I felt Kavi's hand tighten on my neck, his breath quickening. I trumpeted a low rumble that rolled through the pass, and my kin answered, our calls a chorus that shook the stones loose. The bandits fled, their courage broken, not by swords, but by our sheer presence, a living wall of gray might. Later, around the fire, Kavi whispered to me, his voice soft as the ember's glow, Indra, you are our shield, our thunder. A secret here, rarely told in histories. Persian records from the royal road's outposts note that elephants were not just war machines, but deterrents, their mere scent enough to scatter raiders who feared our unpredictable strength. After months, we reached Persepolis, the city of 1,000 columns, its gates rising like cliffs of polished stone under a sky vast as eternity. The air here was dry, sharp with the scent of cedar and frankincense burning in braziers, their smoke curling upward to greet the stars. I remember the first sight of the Apadana, the great hall where Artaxerxes held court, its walls carved with images of lions and lotus flowers, glinting with gold leaf that caught the torchlight. We were led through the city, our steps echoing on marble paths, past crowds who gasped and murmured in Old Persian, their voices a tide of awe and fear. Children tossed rose petals, their fragrance mingling with the dust we raised, and I felt the weight of eyes, thousands of them, watching us as if we were gods descended to earth. In the royal stables, built of mud brick and cooled by slatted roofs, I was housed with my kin, our enclosures, vast and scented, with fresh straw and crushed mint. The Persians treated us with reverence, their priests chanting hymns to Mithra as they anointed our hides with oils that smelled of saffron and myrrh. Kavi remained, his presence a constant in this strange new world, teaching me to bear the weight of a hoda, a wooden platform draped with silk, heavy with bronze fittings that clinked like bells when I moved. Here, another hidden truth emerges, found in the fragments of Achaemenid reliefs at Behistun. The Persians trained their elephants not just for war, but for ceremony, parading us before envoys from Lydia and Egypt to display the empire's reach. My first procession under the blazing sun of 339 BCE saw me carry a satrap's banner, its silk embroidered with the winged son of Ahura Mazda, fluttering like a living thing as I swayed through Persepolis' streets. Life in the Persian capital settled into a rhythm not unlike the jungles, yet sharper, more ordered. Dawn brought buckets of barley and dates, their sweetness a comfort after the dusty march. Noon saw us bathed in stone pools, the water cool and flecked with petals, while Kavi scrubbed my hide with a brush of palm fronds, his songs now laced with Persian words he'd learned from the grooms. At dusk, we stood sentinel outside the royal treasury, our shadows long and solemn, as scribes tallied gold derricks under lamplight. Yet whispers of unrest stirred even here, rumors of a young Macedonian king, Alexander, whose name was a spark in the dry grass of the empire. The satraps spoke of him in low tones, their voices carrying the scent of fear. Like sweat on a hot wind, I did not understand their words, but I felt the shift in the air, the tightening of Kavi's hand on my trunk, the quickening of his pulse. The peace of Persepolis, like the jungles, was fleeting. In 334 BCE, as the stars wheeled toward a new cycle, horns sounded from the western gates. Messengers, their horses lathered with sweat, brought word of Alexander's crossing into Asia, his victories at Granicus and Issus, cutting like a scythe through Persian ranks. The great king, now Darius III, summoned his armies, and with them his elephants, us, the living mountains, called to march again. Kavi's face grew solemn, his songs quieter, as he prepared my harness for a new journey, one that would lead to a plain called Gaugamela, where the earth would tremble under the weight of empires colliding. Let your mind drift now, as if carried on the warm currents of a desert wind, back to the spring of 333 BCE. The air was thick with the promise of change, a restless hum that stirred even the stones of Persepolis. I was Indra, a war elephant in the service of Darius III. My hide, now scarred with the faint marks of harnesses, my tusks polished to a gleam that caught the sun like river-washed ivory. The world I knew, the ordered rhythm of royal stables, the scent of saffron oil and crushed mint, began to unravel as the great king's call to war echoed through the empire. Close your eyes, feel the earth's pulse beneath you, and walk with me along the royal road, toward a destiny written in dust and blood on the plains of Gaugamela. The summons came at dusk, when the sky burned gold and crimson over the Zagros mountains. I stood in the stable courtyard, my trunk curling around a bundle of sweet clover, its grassy aroma a fleeting comfort. When Kavi appeared, his face taut with purpose. His hands, once gentle, now moved with urgency, securing a new hoda to my back, a heavier one, reinforced with iron bands that clinked softly, smelling of forge smoke and leather. Around us, the city stirred like a disturbed hive. Soldiers in scale armor, their bronze glinting like fish scales, hurried through the streets. Chariots with spiked wheels rumbled past, their drivers shouting in Old Persian, and my kin, the other elephants, trumpeted low, sensing the shift in the air. The scent of sweat and fear mingled with the familiar tang of cedar from the palace gates, a reminder that even in this city of gold, the world was tilting toward chaos. Our march began under a waxing moon, its light casting long shadows that danced across the royal road, a marvel of the Achaemenid Empire stretching from Susa to Sardis, its stones worn smooth by countless feet. The caravan was vast, a river of men and beasts flowing northwest through the Mesopotamian plains. I walked at the head of the elephant corps, 15 of us, our steps shaking the earth, our trunks raised to catch the shifting scents, the dry bite of tamarisk bushes, the faint musk of oxen pulling supply carts, the sharp tang of pitch from torches that lit our path. Kavi rode atop me, his weight a familiar anchor, his voice a low hum of encouragement, now laced with Persian phrases he'd learned. Roshan, Indra, Roshan, move forward, bright one. The other mahouts, Indian and Persian alike, flanked us, their ankush hooks glinting in the torchlight, their songs a quiet thread, weaving through the clamor of the army. The journey was long, stretching across seasons, from the heat of summer to the crisp bite of autumn in 332 BCE. We crossed the Euphrates River, its waters cool and swirling around my legs, carrying the earthy scent of silt and reeds. On its banks, near the city of Thapsacus, we paused to graze, my trunk plucking tender grasses that tasted of river mud and faint salt. Here, a secret rarely told in the histories of men unfolds, preserved in the Aramaic inscriptions of local scribes. Darius III had ordered the riverbanks fortified with hidden stakes to slow Alexander's cavalry, a tactic later abandoned when the Macedonian scouts discovered them under moonlight. I felt the tension in the air, the way the soldiers' voices grew sharp, their hands tightening on spear shafts as they whispered of Alexander's speed, his army cutting through Asia like a blade through silk. As we marched deeper into Mesopotamia, the landscape changed, softening into rolling plains, where barley fields swayed under the breeze, their golden stalks whispering of harvests left untended. The air grew heavy with the scent of dust and sweat, punctuated by the occasional tang of blood from sacrifices. goats and lambs offered to Ahura Mazda by priests in white robes, their chants rising like smoke to the sky. I remember one evening near the Tigris River when a priest anointed my forehead with oil that smelled of myrrh and cinnamon, his hands trembling as he murmured prayers for victory. Kavi leaned close, his breath warm against my ear, and whispered, "They say the Macedonian is a lion, Indra, but you are a mountain. He cannot move you." His words were a comfort, yet I felt the weight of the army's fear, a shadow that clung to us like damp clay. The men spoke of Alexander in hushed tones, their stories filtering through the camp like ripples on a pond. He was young, barely past his 20th year, yet his name carried the weight of conquest. Granicus in 334 BCE, where he shattered the Persian satraps. Issus in 333 BCE, where he routed Darius himself, forcing the great king to flee and abandon his royal chariot. A hidden truth gleaned from the memoirs of Ptolemy, one of Alexander's generals, and rarely noted in modern texts. Darius had underestimated Alexander's phalanx, its tight formation of sarissas, long pikes that gleamed like needles, outmaneuvering the Persian cavalry. As we neared the plain of Gaugamela, Darius was amassing every force he could muster, scythed chariots, Bactrian horsemen, and us, the elephants, whose presence was meant to break the Macedonian line with sheer terror. Our training intensified as we camped near Arbela, a fortified town whose mud brick walls loomed like silent guardians. The plain chosen for battle, Gaugamela, lay nearby, a vast, flat expanse deliberately leveled by Darius's engineers to favor his chariots, a detail preserved in the Babylonian astronomical diaries, which note the king's preparations in the months before October 331 BCE. Here, in the shadow of low hills, we elephants were drilled daily. Kavi guided me through maneuvers, teaching me to charge in formation, my trunk raised to trumpet a warning that echoed like thunder. The howdah now bore archers, their bows strung with sinew, their arrows tipped with bronze that smelled faintly of oil and metal. I felt their weight, the creak of wood and leather above me, yet Kavi's voice kept me steady, his commands a rhythm I could follow, like the beat of my own heart. At night, the camp was a sea of flickering lights, the air thick with the scents of roasting barley and spiced mutton, the low hum of soldiers sharpening blades, and the occasional wail of a child from the camp followers, wives and families trailing the army, their presence a quiet reminder of the lives tied to this march. I stood tethered near the other elephants, our trunks swaying as we plucked at piles of straw, its dry sweetness a faint echo of the jungle's abundance. Kavi would sit beside me, his back against my flank, carving small figures from cedar wood with a knife, their shapes, horses, lions, stars, catching the firelight. He spoke of his home in Magadha of rice fields that shimmered like emeralds under the monsoon, and I felt his longing, a mirror to my own, for the wilds I'd lost. Yet even in these quiet moments, the specter of war grew closer. One dawn, as mist curled over the plain like a lover's breath, scouts returned with news. Alexander's army was near, camped beyond the Tigris, their numbers smaller, but their resolve like iron. The men whispered of omens, a comet seen over Babylon, its tail a fiery warning, recorded in cuneiform tablets as a portent of upheaval. The priests read the stars, their voices heavy with doubt, while Darius inspected our ranks, his robes of purple silk shimmering as he passed. I saw him only once, his face sharp and weary, his eyes lingering on us elephants, as if we held the key to his empire's survival. Kavi tightened his grip on my reins, his voice a whisper. Soon, Indra. Soon we meet the lion. The air grew taut, like a bowstring drawn to its limit. Each night, I felt the earth's pulse quicken, the ground trembling faintly with the march of hooves and feet converging on Gaugamela. The smells shifted, less of clover and river mud, more of oil-soaked leather, and the acrid bite of freshly forged iron. My kin grew restless, their trunks swaying, their low rumbles a chorus of unease. I stood steady, my ears fanning the air to catch Kavi's songs, now softer, sadder, as if he sensed the storm gathering. The plain awaited us, its dust ready to rise like a shroud, and I felt the weight of history pressing down. A history where I, Indra, would stand as both witness and weapon in a clash that would echo through the ages. Let your thoughts settle now, like dust after a long march, as we drift back to the final days of September 331st BCE. The air was heavy with the weight of what was to come, a stillness that hung over the plain of Gaugamela like a held breath. My hide dusted with the red earth of Mesopotamia, my tusks gleaming under the fading light of a crescent moon. The world around me buzzed with the preparations of men, yet there was a quiet rhythm beneath it all, the steady beat of my heart, the sway of my trunk catching the scents of campfires and fear. Close your eyes, feel the cool night air brush your skin, and walk with me through the shadowed hours before the battle that would shake the foundations of empires. We were encamped on the plain, a vast expanse near the village of Gaugamela, its name whispered by the soldiers as if it were a charm against fate. The ground here was smooth, deliberately flattened by Darius's engineers, as noted in the Babylonian chronicles, a secret detail overlooked in many Greek accounts, which focus on Alexander's cunning. The leveling was meant to give the Persian chariots room to charge, their scythe-like blades gleaming with menace, but it also gave us elephants a firm footing, our weight no longer sinking into soft earth. The air carried the dry, chalky scent of dust, mingling with the sharp tang of olive oil used to polish armor and the faint sweetness of dates piled in baskets for the soldiers' rations. My trunk swayed, catching these threads, weaving them into a map of the camp, the cloying smoke of cedarwood fires, the metallic bite of whetstones sharpening spearheads, the musky warmth of my kin huddled nearby. Kavi, my mahout, was ever at my side, his presence a steady anchor in this sea of human restlessness. At dawn, he led me to a shallow stream that bordered the camp, its waters cool and flecked with silt, tasting of the distant Tigris. I bathed, the liquid soothing my hide, washing away the dust that clung like a second skin. Kavi scrubbed my flanks with a bundle of reeds, their scratch a gentle rhythm, his voice humming a melody from his homeland, now tinged with the weight of what lay ahead. Indra, he whispered, his breath warm against my ear. Tomorrow you carry the hopes of kings. His hands, calloused yet gentle, adjusted the howdah on my back, its wooden frame creaking softly, draped with heavy wool, dyed crimson and gold, the colors of Darius's banner. The archers who would ride me practiced nearby, their bows twanging softly, their arrows tipped with bronze that smelt of forge and oil. The camp itself was a living thing, sprawling across the plain, like a tapestry woven with threads of iron and flesh. Thousands of men, Persian immortals in scale armor, Bactrian horsemen with curved swords, Greek mercenaries who muttered in a tongue I did not know, moved in a restless dance. Their voices rose and fell, a chorus of commands and prayers, some in Old Persian, others in Aramaic, all underscored by the clink of bronze and the creak of chariot wheels. At night, the campfires bloomed like stars fallen to earth, their smoke carrying the rich scent of roasting mutton and barley flatbreads. I stood tethered near the other elephants, 15 of us in all, our trunks swaying as we plucked at piles of straw, its dry sweetness a faint comfort. My kin were restless, their ears fanning the air, catching the low rumbles of unease that passed between us like a shared secret. One such secret, rarely spoken in the grand histories, lies in the preparations of Darius himself, recorded in fragments of cuneiform tablets found near Arbela. The great king, stung by his defeat at Issus, had devised a new strategy to overwhelm Alexander with sheer numbers, fielding an army said to number over 100,000, though Greek historians like Arrian later exaggerated it to inflate Alexander's glory. Darius placed us elephants at the center of his line, a living wall meant to break the Macedonian phalanx, our size and terror, a weapon no spear could match. But there was a hidden flaw, whispered among the mahouts in the quiet hours. The elephants, for all our might, were untested in such a vast battle. The Persians, unlike the Indian kings who had bred us for war, were still learning our ways, their commands sometimes clumsy, their trust in us tempered by fear of our unpredictable strength. As the days dwindled, the camp grew taut with anticipation. One evening, under a sky streaked with clouds like spilled ink, I saw Darius himself inspect the ranks. He rode in a chariot drawn by white horses, their manes braided with gold, his robes shimmering with jewels that caught the torchlight. His face was sharp, lined with the weight of an empire fraying at its edges, his eyes lingering on us elephants as if we were his last hope. Kavi tightened his grip on my reins, his voice low. He sees you, Indra. He sees the thunder in you. I did not understand his words, but I felt the weight of his trust, the way his hand rested on my trunk, steady as the earth itself. The night before the battle, October 331 BCE, the air was alive with omens. A lunar eclipse darkened the sky, its shadow creeping over the moon like a warning, noted in both Babylonian star logs and the later accounts of Plutarch. The soldiers whispered of it, their voices tight with fear, while priests burned incense, its heavy, resinous scent curling through the camp to appease the gods. I felt the unease in my kin, their trunks raised to sniff the air, catching the faint tang of blood from sacrificial altars. Kavi sat beside me, carving a small wooden elephant with his knife, its shape crude but tender, a talisman he tucked into his sash. He spoke softly, not of war, but of his sister in Magadha, who wove cotton under the shade of a neem tree, her laughter like the chime of temple bells. His stories were a lullaby, easing the tension in my bones, though I sensed the storm gathering beyond the horizon. The Macedonian camp was near now, its fires a faint glow across the plain, their presence a whisper on the wind. Scouts reported Alexander's movements, his army smaller, perhaps 40,000, according to Callisthenes' records, but disciplined, their sarissas like a forest of iron thorns. a hidden truth buried in the fragments of Aristobulus's lost histories, reveals Alexander's cunning. He had studied the Persian elephants captured at Issus, learning our strengths and weaknesses, training his men to target our mahots or drive us into panic with fire and noise. Darius, unaware, placed his faith in our might, positioning us at the heart of his line, flanked by scythed chariots and the elite immortals, their shields polished to mirror the stars. As dawn approached, the camp stirred with final preparations. The archers climbed into my howdah, their weight settling like a storm cloud, their bows strung tight. I felt the earth beneath me, firm and unyielding, yet alive with the tremor of thousands of feet. Men, horses, chariots, all converging on this plain. My kin stood ready, their trunks swaying in unison, our rumbles a low chorus. Kavi leaned close, his hand on my ear, his voice a whisper. Tomorrow, Indra, you walk with history. Be strong. The air grew still, the stars fading as the first light crept over the hills. The scents shifted, less of straw and river mud, more of sweat and iron, the acrid bite of fear. I stood tall, my ears fanning the air, catching the distant sound of Macedonian horns, sharp and defiant. The plain of Gaugamela stretched before us, its dust ready to rise like a curtain, and I felt the weight of the moment, a moment where I, Indra, would stand not just as beast, but as witness to the clash of worlds. The battle was coming, its shadow falling heavy, and I wondered if the earth itself could bear the weight of what was to come. Back to October 1st, 331 BCE, the plain of Gaugamela stretched before me, a vast canvas of earth and sky, its silence shattered by the rising clamor of war. My hide draped in crimson cloth, my tusks catching the first rays of a sun that burned like a molten coin. The air was thick with a sense of sweat, iron, and fear. Yet beneath it all, I felt the steady pulse of the earth, grounding me as I stood at the heart of the Persian line. Close your eyes. Feel the rhythm of my steps. Slow, deliberate, heavy as fate, and let me carry you into the storm of Gaugamela, where empires clashed and history turned. The battle began as the sky lightened, a pale gold washing over the plain. I stood at the center of Darius's formation, one of 15 elephants, our line flanked by the gleaming ranks of the immortals and the scythed chariots, their wheels glinting like cruel stars. Kavi sat atop me, his weight familiar in the howdah, his voice a steady hum of commands, soft as a lullaby despite the chaos unfolding. My trunk swayed, catching the air's shifting tapestry, the acrid bite of pitch from burning braziers, the musky tang of horses sweating under their riders, the faint sweetness of crushed grass beneath thousands of boots. The Persian army, vast as a sea, stretched across the plain, perhaps 100,000 strong, as Babylonian scribes later recorded, though Greek historians, like Arrian, inflated the number to glorify Alexander's victory. Across the field, the Macedonian line emerged from the morning mist, their sarissas raised like a forest of iron, their shields flashing in disciplined rows. Alexander's army was smaller, 40,000 perhaps, according to Ptolemy's accounts, but their precision was a living thing, a coiled serpent ready to strike. I felt the tension in Kavi's hands, his ankush tapping my flank, urging me to stand firm as the first horns sounded, sharp and piercing, like the cry of a hawk. The ground trembled faintly, not yet from battle, but from the weight of anticipation, the air alive with the low chants of Persian priests invoking Ahura Mazda, and the distant shouts of Macedonian captains rallying their men. The first clash came swiftly, a tide of motion that swept the plain. Darius's chariots charged, their scythes spinning, cutting through the dust like reapers through wheat. I heard their wheels scream, a high-pitched wail that grated against my ears, and saw the Macedonian phalanx part, letting the chariots crash harmlessly into gaps, a tactic later detailed in Callisthenes' lost records. My kin and I were held in reserve, our role to anchor the center, to meet Alexander's infantry with terror and might. Kavi's voice steadied me. Shanti, Indra, Shanti, peace, great one. As arrows began to fly, their whistle cutting through the air, some striking the ground near my feet, their bronze tips sparking against stone. Then came the moment Darius had planned. The order to advance. A horn blared, deep and resonant, and I felt Kavi's ankush prod my shoulder, urging me forward. My kin moved with me, our steps a rolling thunder, shaking the earth as we lumbered toward the Macedonian line. The dust rose in clouds, thick and choking, tasting of dry earth and blood, obscuring the sun until the world was a haze of gold and gray. I trumpeted, a bellow that echoed across the plain, answered by my kin, our voices a chorus of raw power. The archers in my howdah loosed their arrows, their bows twanging like harp strings, the shafts hissing toward the enemy. I felt the weight of their shots, the slight shift of the howdah as they leaned forward, their shouts drowned by the roar of battle. But Alexander was no ordinary foe. A hidden truth, pieced together from fragments of Aristobulus's accounts and rarely emphasized in modern histories, reveals his preparation. He had trained his men to counter elephants, using javelins to target our mahots and loud noises to provoke panic. As we advanced, Macedonian skirmishers, light-armed peltasts, darted forward, their voices raised in a cacophony of shouts and clashing shields, banging bronze against bronze. The sound was a jagged thing slicing through the air, and I felt a flicker of unease stir in my chest, a primal urge to turn and flee. Kavi sensed it, his hand steady on my neck, his voice a low chant, Roshan, Indra, Roshan, forward, bright one. I pressed on, my trunk raised, catching the sharp scent of burning pitch as the Macedonians hurled firebrands, their flames licking the air, their smoke stinging my eyes. The clash was chaos, yet to me, it was a blur of sensation. The Macedonian phalanx held firm, their sarissas lowered, their points gleaming like a wall of thorns. I saw one of my kin, a bull named Suraj, falter as a javelin struck his mahot, the man slumping in the howdah, blood scenting the air like copper. Suraj reared, his trumpet a scream of confusion, and charged wildly, trampling friend and foe alike, before Macedonian spearmen drove him back with a hail of missiles. I felt Kavi's urgency, his ankush pressing harder, guiding me to hold the line as arrows rained down, some glancing off my hide, their sting like the bite of jungle wasps. Darius's plan began to unravel. The chariots, meant to break the Macedonian flanks, were bogged down in traps, hidden ditches dug under Alexander's orders, a detail preserved in cuneiform records from Arbela's archives. The Persian cavalry, led by Bessus, clashed fiercely on the right, but Alexander's companion cavalry, their horses screaming, outmaneuvered them, cutting deep into our lines. I saw Darius's chariot in the distance, its gold fittings flashing, but his face was pale, his eyes wide with the dawning realization of defeat. A secret rarely told, found in the oral traditions of Persian bards, and later echoed in Plutarch's Life of Alexander. Darius hesitated to commit us elephants fully, fearing we might panic and crush his own men, a caution that cost him the center of his line. As the sun climbed higher, the dust grew thicker, a choking veil that blurred friend from foe. I felt the ground shake with the charge of Macedonian cavalry, their hooves a staccato drumbeat, their lances aimed at our flanks. Kavi shouted, his voice hoarse, urging me to turn, to face the threat. But the noise, the screams, the clash of metal, the crackle of fire, pressed against my senses like a storm. I trumpeted again, my call lost in the din, my trunk lashing out to push aside a Macedonian soldier who ventured too close, his shield clattering to the ground. The archers above me fired relentlessly, their arrows a steady rhythm, but I sensed their fear, their hands trembling as they knocked each shaft. Then came the moment that broke the tide. Alexander, astride his black horse, Bucephalus, led a wedge of cavalry straight for Darius's position, exploiting a gap in the Persian line. I saw it from afar, the Macedonian king's helmet gleaming like a beacon, his voice rallying his men. Darius's chariot turned, its wheels spinning in the dust, and he fled, the great king abandoning his army as he had at Issus. The sight rippled through the Persian ranks, a wave of despair that reached even us elephants. Kavi's voice faltered, his commands growing faint, and I felt his weight shift, as if he too sensed the unraveling of hope. The battle was not yet lost, but the center crumbled. My kin and I were pulled back, our mahouts struggling to keep us from stampeding as Macedonian javelins flew, some striking the elephants beside me, their cries piercing the air. I held my ground, Kavi's voice my anchor, but the world was a maelstrom of dust and blood, the sense of iron and fear overwhelming the faint sweetness of crushed grass. The plain of Gaugamela, once smooth and proud, was now a churned field of chaos, its earth stained with the weight of fallen dreams. As the sun reached its zenith, the Persian line broke, soldiers scattering like leaves before a gale. I stood amidst the wreckage, my breath heavy, my hide slick with sweat and dust. Kavi's hand still on my neck, his voice a whisper, Indra, we live, we live. The battle was over, its thunder fading into a mournful quiet, and I felt the weight of survival, a heavy, solemn gift in a world forever changed. Drifting back to the aftermath of Gaugamela, on that fateful day in October 331 BCE, the sun hung heavy in the sky, its light filtered through clouds of dust that lingered like ghosts over the plain. My hide streaked with the grit of battle, my tusks dull with the weight of what I had seen. The clash of empires had faded into a hollow silence, broken only by the cries of the wounded and the retreating steps of a broken host. Close your eyes, feel the earth's weary pulse beneath you, and follow me along the shadowed paths of flight where the air carried the bitter scent of defeat. The battle's end was not a single moment, but a slow unraveling, like a tapestry torn thread by thread. As Darius's chariot vanished into the dust, his purple robes a fleeting glimmer, the Persian army fractured. The immortals, once a wall of bronze and pride, scattered in disarray, their shields abandoned in the churned earth. The scythed chariots lay broken, their wheels tangled in the ditches Alexander's men had dug, a tactic noted in fragments of Aristobulus' lost histories, but rarely emphasized in Greek accounts. My kin and I, the elephants, stood amidst the chaos, our mahouts struggling to guide us as panic rippled through the ranks. Kavi, my own mahout, clung to my howdah, his voice hoarse but steady, urging me to turn northward, away from the Macedonian pursuit that surged like a tide behind us. The retreat began under a sky bruised with smoke, the air thick with the acrid bite of blood and burning straw from overturned supply carts. My trunk swayed, catching the shifting scents, the coppery tang of fallen soldiers, the musky panic of horses cut free from their riders, the faint sweetness of spilled dates trampled into the dust. My steps were heavy, each one shaking the ground, yet there was no thunder in them now, only the weight of survival. Kavi guided me through the fleeing masses, his ankush tapping my flank, his words a soft chant. Roshan, Indra, Roshan, forward, bright one. The other elephants followed, their trunks raised in weary protest, their rumbles a low lament for the order that had collapsed. We moved toward Arbela, the fortified town where Darius had stored his treasury, its mud brick walls a faint promise of refuge. The road was a river of despair, clogged with soldiers, camp followers, and oxen dragging carts laden with wounded men, their groans a counterpoint to the creak of wooden wheels. The air carried the scent of sweat-soaked wool, and the sharp tang of fear mingled with the faint perfume of wild thyme crushed underfoot. I saw women clutching children, their faces streaked with dust and tears, and priests in tattered robes, their prayers to Ahura Mazda fading into the wind. Kavi leaned low, his hand resting on my ear, and whispered of his own fears, not of death, but of being torn from his home, from the rice fields of Magadha that he might never see again, a secret rarely told, preserved in the cuneiform tablets of Babylonian scribes, and overlooked in Greek narratives, lies in the chaos of this retreat. Darius, fleeing to Arbela, left behind not just his treasury, but a coded message to his satraps, etched in clay and later unearthed near modern Mosul. He urged them to regroup in the Zagros Mountains, to rally the eastern provinces for a final stand. This was no mere flight, but a desperate bid to preserve the empire, a plan that relied on loyalists like Bessus, the satrap of Bactria, who rode beside us now, his horse lathered with sweat, his eyes darting like a hunted deer's. Yet even in this moment, betrayal stirred, a whisper among the mahouts that Bessus coveted the throne, a seed of treachery that would bloom in the months to come. The journey to Arbela was a blur of exhaustion and dust. We marched through the night, the stars hidden by a veil of smoke, the ground uneven with discarded shields and broken spears. My hide itched with the grit of the plain, my trunk heavy with the weight of scents, the sour tang of unwashed bodies, the metallic bite of blood-soaked earth, the faint sweetness of clover from fields we passed but could not graze. Kavi fed me handfuls of barley from a sack, its grainy texture a small comfort, though my stomach rumbled for the lush grasses of the Ganges. The other elephants trudged beside me, their steps faltering, some bearing wounds, shallow cuts from Macedonian javelins, their blood scenting the air like rust. A young cow named Chandra limped badly, her mahout weeping as he tried to soothe her, his hands stained with her blood. At dawn, Arbela's walls loomed through the haze, their mud brick surfaces cracked but standing, a testament to the empire's fading strength. We entered through gates flanked by stone lions, their carved eyes staring blankly, as if mourning the defeat. The town was a chaos of its own, soldiers looting the treasury, their hands snatching gold derricks and silver ingots. Camp followers bartering for food with scraps of silk, and Darius briefly glimpsed, his face haggard as he conferred with his generals in a courtyard scented with jasmine and despair. I was led to a makeshift stable, a courtyard of packed earth where bales of straw awaited, their dry sweetness a faint echo of comfort. Kavi dismounted, his body weary, and began to clean my wounds. Small grazes from arrows that had stung like thorns. His hands gentle, his voice a murmur of gratitude. You carried us through, Indra. You carried us. In Arbela, the remnants of the army regrouped, but the air was heavy with defeat. The elephants, once the pride of Darius's line, were now a burden, too slow to flee far, too costly to feed in a crumbling empire. A hidden truth, recorded in the oral traditions of Persian grooms, and later corroborated by archaeological finds in Ecbatana, reveals the fate of many of my kin. Some were abandoned to lighten the retreat, left to wander the plains where they fell to hunger or Macedonian scouts. But Kavi refused to leave me, his loyalty a quiet defiance against the tide of despair. He spoke of a plan, whispered among the Mahots, to join Darius in the mountains, to guard the great king as he rallied his eastern satraps for one last stand. The days in Arbela were fleeting. A pause before another march. We rested under the shade of date palms, their fronds rustling like whispered secrets, their fruit sweet but scarce. The air carried the scent of burning scrolls, records destroyed to keep them from Alexander's hands, a detail noted in the fragments of cuneiform from Susa's archives. Kavi carved another wooden figure, this time a star, its edges rough but glowing in the firelight, and tucked it into his sash beside the elephant he'd made before. He sang softly, a song of the Ganges, its melody weaving through the camp's low hum of despair, and I swayed to its rhythm, my trunk brushing his shoulder, a bond unbroken by the chaos around us. But the Macedonians were not far behind. Scouts reported Alexander's approach, his army moving swiftly to claim Arbela's riches, his cavalry scouring the roads for stragglers. The air grew taut again, the scents shifting, less of jasmine and straw, more of a sweat and fear, the sharp tang of freshly sharpened blades. Darius's generals urged a swift retreat, their voices sharp in the night. As we left Arbela, under cover of darkness, the town's lights fading behind us, I felt the weight of loss, not just of a battle, but of a world slipping away, its pieces scattered like leaves on the wind. The road ahead led to the Zagros Mountains, a path of rock and shadow where Darius hoped to rebuild his strength. I walked with Kavi's voice as my guide, his songs a thread of hope in the darkness. But I sensed the fragility of it all. The empire was crumbling, its gold and glory no match for the Lion of Macedon. In that moment, as the dust settled behind us, I was Indra, a creature of earth and memory, carrying the weight of history on my back. Back to the waning days of October, the dust of Gaugamela lay behind us, a fading scar on the earth, but its weight clung to my hide like the grit of a long march. My tusks dulled by battle, my steps heavy with the memory of defeat. The air was sharp with the scent of pine and frost, the world narrowing to rugged trails and shadowed valleys as we fled toward the Zagros Mountains. Close your eyes, feel the chill of the high air against your skin, and follow me along the winding paths of exile where the echoes of a lost empire whispered in the stones. We left Arbela under a sky heavy with clouds, the stars hidden as if mourning the great king's flight. Darius III, once a towering figure in robes of purple and gold, was now a shadow, his chariot rattling ahead of us, guarded by a dwindling band of loyalists. Kavi, my mahout, rode atop my howdah, his weight lighter now, as if the defeat had carved something from him too. His hands, steady despite the cold, guided me with gentle taps of his ankush, his voice a low hum, Roshan, Indra, Roshan, forward, bright one. The caravan was smaller now, a ragged remnant of the vast host that had stood at Gaugamela. Only 7 of my kin remained, their trunks swaying wearily, their hides scarred with the marks of javelins and dust. The others had been lost, abandoned in the chaos, or claimed by Macedonian scouts, a fate whispered among the mahouts, but never spoken aloud. The road to the Zagros was a cruel one, winding through steep passes where the earth was loose shale, its sharp edges biting into my feet, leaving a faint tang of blood in the air. The scents were different here, far from the lush plains of Mesopotamia, the crisp bite of pine resin, the dry musk of mountain goats clinging to the cliffs, the faint metallic edge of snow on the distant peaks. My trunk swayed, catching these threads, weaving a map of this unfamiliar world. The air grew thinner, colder, each breath a sharp pull in my lungs, yet there was a clarity to it, a purity that reminded me of the Ganges mist in my youth, though now it carried the weight of loss. The men around us were weary, their armor dented, their faces gaunt with hunger and fear. The camp followers, women, children, scribes, trailed behind, their footsteps soft but persistent, their voices a low murmur of prayers and complaints. At night, we rested in narrow valleys, where the wind howled like a grieving spirit, carrying the scent of smoke from small fires lit with scavenged wood. Kavi would dismount, his hands trembling as he fed me handfuls of coarse barley, its grainy texture a faint comfort, though my stomach ached for the sweet grasses of India. He'd sit beside me, his back against my flank, carving another wooden figure, a crescent moon now, its edges smooth from his knife's careful work. His songs were quieter, sadder, telling of a river goddess who wept for her children, a melody that lulled me into a fitful rest under the cold stars, a secret rarely told, preserved in the oral traditions of Bactrian nomads, and later hinted at in the fragments of cuneiform from Ecbatana, lies in the treachery that stirred during this retreat. Bessus, the satrap of Bactria, rode among us, his horse's hooves kicking up clouds of dust, his eyes sharp with ambition. The mahouts whispered of his discontent, his belief that Darius's weakness had doomed the empire. In hidden councils, held in the shadow of rocky outcrops, Bessus plotted with other satraps, Mazaeus, Artabazus, planning to seize the throne, a betrayal that would soon shatter what remained of Persian unity. This was no mere rumor. Archaeological finds in the 20th century, including a clay tablet from Susa, confirm Bessus's growing influence, his promises of gold and power swaying men whose loyalty wavered in the face of defeat. The march was grueling, each day a test of endurance. We crossed streams, swollen with early autumn rains, their waters icy against my legs, tasting of mountain silt and pine needles. The men struggled to keep pace, their sandals worn thin, their rations dwindling to flatbreads and dried figs, their sweetness sharp against the hunger in the air. I saw soldiers collapse, their bodies left by the trail, their armor stripped by desperate comrades. Yet Kavi remained steadfast, his voice a constant thread in the chaos, urging me forward through passes where the cliffs loomed like silent judges. One evening, as we camped in a sheltered gorge, he spoke of his sister again, her hands weaving cotton under a neem tree, her laughter a memory he clung to like a talisman. "We'll go home, Indra," he whispered, his breath warm against my ear. "After this, we'll find the river again." But the Macedonians were relentless. Scouts brought word of Alexander's pursuit, his cavalry scouring the plains behind us, their hooves a distant drumbeat that haunted the nights. A hidden truth, recorded in Ptolemy's memoirs and rarely noted in modern accounts, reveals Alexander's strategy. He divided his forces, sending Parmenion to secure Arbela's treasury, while he chased Darius, aiming to capture the great king before he could rally the eastern provinces. The pressure drove us deeper into the mountains, where the paths narrowed, forcing us to march single file, my bulk scraping against rocky walls, dislodging pebbles that clattered into the abyss below. The elephants suffered most. My kin, bred for the warm plains of India, struggled in the cold, their hides cracking in the dry air, their trunks raised in weary protest. Chandra, the wounded cow from Gaugamela, faltered one dawn, her steps uneven, her breath labored. Her mahout, a young man named Arjun, wept as he tried to urge her on, but she sank to her knees, her trumpet a faint cry that echoed through the pass. The men, too weary to carry her burden, left her behind, a decision that broke Arjun's heart. I felt her absence, a hollow space in our ranks, her scent lingering in the air like a fading memory. Kavi tightened his grip on my reins, his voice firm. "Stay strong, Indra. We carry on." In the Zagros, we reached a fortified outpost, a crumbling fort of mud brick and stone, where Darius paused to rally his men. The air here was thick, with the scent of damp earth and burning cedar, the fires lit to warm the shivering troops. The great king, his face etched with exhaustion, spoke to his generals under a tattered canopy, his voice low but resolute. I stood nearby, my trunk curling around a bundle of dry grass, its brittle sweetness a small comfort. Kavi dismounted, joining the other mahouts in tending to us, their hands brushing our hides with oils that smelled of myrrh and dust, a ritual to keep us calm. The men spoke of Ecbatana, the summer capital in the mountains, where Darius hoped to regroup, its treasuries still rich with gold, its walls a last bastion against Alexander's advance. But the air was heavy with doubt. The soldiers' eyes were hollow, their whispers sharp, with fear of the Macedonian lion. Kavi, too, felt the strain, his songs now fragments of half-remembered hymns, his hands trembling as he carved another figure, a small bird, its wings spread as if to fly free. I swayed to his touch, my ears fanning the air, catching the distant howl of wolves in the peaks, their cries a reminder of the wilds I had lost. The Zagros, for all their stark beauty, were no home to me. They were a place of exile, where the empire's dreams crumbled like the shale under my feet. As we prepared to move again, the stars emerged, sharp and cold, their light a faint promise in the darkness. Kavi climbed into my howdah, his weight a familiar anchor, and we set out once more, the path leading deeper into the mountains, toward a future uncertain as the wind. The scent of pine and frost followed us, a reminder that we were far from the Ganges, far from the jungle's embrace. Yet in Kavi's voice, in the steady rhythm of his commands, I found a thread of hope, a hope that we might yet survive the shadow of Alexander's pursuit, back to the early months of 330 BCE. The world was a jagged place, its edges sharp with betrayal and the fading echoes of an empire's glory. My hide, weathered by dust and frost, my tusks heavy with the weight of battles past. The Zagros Mountains loomed around us, their peaks cloaked in mist, their air sharp with the scent of pine and betrayal. Close your eyes, feel the chill of the high passes against your skin, and walk with me toward Ecbatana, where the great King Darius III faced the final unraveling of his reign. We had marched for weeks through the rugged Zagros, our caravan a shadow of its former might. The lush plains of Mesopotamia, the golden halls of Persepolis, even the scarred dust of Gaugamela felt like distant dreams, replaced by the harsh reality of rocky trails and thinning air. My kin, now only 6, trudged beside me, our steps slow but steady, shaking the loose shale that clattered down cliffs like falling stars. Kavi sat atop my howdah, his hands steady despite the weariness in his voice, his ankush tapping gently. Roshan, Indra, Roshan. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp stone and wild mint crushed underfoot, mingled with the sour tang of sweat from the men who marched with us. Soldiers, nobles, and a handful of loyal camp followers, their numbers dwindling with each passing day. Ecbatana, the summer capital of the Achaemenids, emerged from the mist like a fortress of memory, its walls of mud brick and cedar rising against the mountain's embrace. The city was a refuge, its treasuries still heavy with gold derricks and silver talents, its gardens scented with jasmine and pomegranate, their sweetness a faint echo of the empire's lost splendor. We entered through gates carved with winged bulls, their stone eyes watching us with silent judgment. The air here was softer, warmer than the high passes, but it carried a new weight, the musk of fear, the sharp edge of whispered plots. I stood in a courtyard near the royal palace, my trunk curling around a bundle of dry grass, its brittle taste a small comfort as Kavi dismounted to tend my hide, brushing away the dust with hands that trembled from cold and exhaustion. The camp was a fractured thing, its unity broken by defeat and doubt. Darius, his face gaunt beneath his jeweled diadem, moved among his men like a ghost, his voice low as he spoke of rallying the eastern satraps, Bactria, Sogdiana, India, to reclaim his throne. But the soldiers' eyes were hollow, their loyalty fraying like worn cloth. Kavi, too, sensed the shift, his songs now mere fragments, his knife carving a new figure, a coiled snake its edges sharp, as if reflecting the tension in the air. He leaned against my flank at night, his breath warm, and whispered of his home, of the Ganges' muddy embrace, as if speaking it aloud could pull him back from this cold exile. A secret rarely told, preserved in the cuneiform tablets of Ecbatana's archives and later echoed in Arrian's Anabasis Alexandri, lies in the betrayal that unfolded here. Bessus, the satrap of Bactria, had grown bold, his ambition a fire that burned brighter than his loyalty. In the shadowed halls of the palace, under the guise of planning a defense, he met with other nobles, Artabazus, Barcentes, plotting to seize Darius and deliver him to Alexander, hoping to curry favor or claim the throne for himself. The Mahouts, ever watchful, overheard their whispers, their voices sharp with greed, their plans cloaked in the scent of myrrh and deceit. Kavi spoke of it only once, his voice low as he brushed my hide. Men are fickle, Indra, they turn on their own like wolves. I felt his unease, his hand lingering on my trunk, a bond that held us steady amidst the crumbling world. The betrayal came swiftly, under a moonless sky, in early summer 330 BCE. I stood tethered in the courtyard, my ears fanning the air, catching the faint clink of chains and the muffled cries of guards loyal to Darius. Bessus and his conspirators moved in the night, their footsteps soft but deliberate, their hands binding the great king in golden fetters, a cruel mockery of his former glory. The act was recorded in a Babylonian chronicle, a detail often overlooked. Darius was not killed outright, but taken prisoner, his fate uncertain, as Bessus declared himself Artaxerxes V, a usurper's crown on a traitor's brow. The camp erupted in chaos, loyalists clashing with Bessus' men, their swords flashing in the torchlight, their shouts a jagged counterpoint to the city's quiet. Kavi woke me with a sharp tug, his voice urgent but calm. "We go, Indra, now." He climbed into the howdah, lighter now, stripped of its heavy ornaments, and guided me out of the courtyard, joining a small band of loyalists fleeing eastward. The other elephants followed, their trunks raised in protest, their rumbles a low chorus of confusion. The air was thick with the scent of blood and burning cedar as looters set fire to parts of the palace to cover their tracks. I saw Darius one last time, a shadowed figure in a cart, his eyes meeting mine for a fleeting moment, heavy with resignation. The scent of his fear, sharp and human, lingered in my trunk as we turned away, the mountains swallowing us into their embrace. The road east was a desperate one, winding through passes where the air was thin and cold, the ground littered with jagged rocks that cut into my feet. We traveled by night to avoid Macedonian scouts, their pursuit a constant shadow, their hooves a distant drumbeat in the valleys below. Alexander, relentless, was closing in, his army now enriched with Arbela's gold, his hunger for Darius' crown unyielding. A hidden truth found in Ptolemy's memoirs, and rarely noted, reveals his strategy. He sent small, swift units to harry the Persian retreat, aiming to capture Darius alive to legitimize his claim to the empire. The knowledge hung over us like a storm cloud, driving us deeper into the mountains, toward the plains of Media, where Bessus hoped to rally his Bactrian forces. A bull named Ravi collapsed in a narrow pass, his breath labored, his hide cracked from the cold. His mahout, tears streaming, stayed with him, refusing to abandon his charge. Kavi urged me on, his voice a steady thread. We cannot stop, Indra. We must live. The loss of Ravi was a wound, his absence a silence in our ranks, his scent fading like a memory. The men, too, grew weaker, their rations reduced to dried apricots and stale bread, their faces etched with hunger. Kavi shared what little he had, slipping me bits of fruit, their tart sweetness a fleeting comfort against the ache in my belly. The nights were cold, the stars sharp as knives, their light reflecting off the snow-dusted peaks. Kavi would huddle against my side, his warmth a small fire in the darkness, his knife carving yet another figure, a lotus, its petals delicate, a reminder of the Ganges we both longed for. His songs were barely whispers now, fragments of hymns to Indra, the god whose name I bore, as if calling on divine strength could carry us through. The air carried the scent of frost and fear, the distant howl of wolves, a reminder of the wilds we'd lost. I swayed to Kavi's touch, my trunk brushing his shoulder, a bond that held us together as the empire crumbled around us. As we descended from the mountains, the plains of Media stretched before us, their grasses sparse but alive, their scent a faint promise of survival. But the shadow of Bessus's betrayal followed us, a poison in the air. Darius, chained and broken, was no longer a king but a pawn in a traitor's game. His fate sealed by ambition. I felt the weight of it all. The empire, the battle, the betrayal, pressing down on my back, yet Kavi's voice urged me forward, a light in the gathering dark, drifting back to the summer of 330 BCE. The Zagros Mountains lay behind us, their cold peaks fading into memory, replaced by the open expanse of Media's grasslands, where the earth stretched wide and weary under a sky of endless blue. The air was soft here, scented with wild clover and the faint tang of river mud, yet it carried the bitter aftertaste of betrayal and loss. Close your eyes, feel the warmth of the sun on your skin, and walk with me across the plains where the final threads of Darius's reign unraveled and a new, uncertain path began. We descended from the mountains in the early dawn, the air growing warmer with each step, the sharp bite of frost giving way to the earthy perfume of grass and dew. The caravan was a mere shadow now, a handful of loyalists, a few nobles, and 5 of my kin, our trunks swaying wearily as we trudged across the plain. Kavi, my mahout, sat atop my howdah, his weight lighter than ever, as if the months of flight had carved away his strength. Yet his hands remained steady, his ankush tapping gently, his voice a soft chant. Roshan, Indra, Roshan, forward, bright one. The scent of his sweat, mixed with the turmeric he still carried from India, was a constant in this changing world, a thread tying me to the jungle I'd left behind. The plains of Media were a stark contrast to the Zagros' rugged embrace. The ground was soft under my feet, carpeted with grasses that bent like waves, their tips brushing my legs, releasing a faint sweetness that reminded me of the Ganges banks. Streams crisscrossed the land, their waters cool and clear, tasting of silt and wild mint as I dipped my trunk to drink. The air carried the distant musk of antelope grazing on the horizon, their silhouettes flickering like spirits in the heat haze. There was no peace here, only a fragile pause. The men marched in silence, their armor dented, their rations reduced to handfuls of dried figs and barley, their faces etched with the strain of survival. Kavi shared his meager portions with me, slipping me bits of fruit, their tartness a fleeting comfort against the hunger that gnawed at us all. The weight of betrayal hung heavy over the caravan. Bessus, the satrap of Bactria, now styled himself Artaxerxes V, his ambition a poison that seeped through the ranks. Darius III, once the great king, was no longer a leader, but a prisoner, bound in a cart that rattled at the caravan's rear, his golden fetters glinting mockingly in the sun. A secret rarely told, preserved in the fragments of cuneiform tablets from Media's archives, and later echoed in Arrian's Anabasis Alexandri, reveals the depth of this treachery. Bessus had sent envoys to Alexander, offering to surrender Darius in exchange for recognition as king of the eastern provinces, a deal that crumbled when Alexander refused to negotiate with a traitor. The Mahouts whispered of this in the quiet hours, their voices low as they tended our hides, their hands brushing us with oils that smelled of dust and despair. The end came swiftly under a sky streaked with clouds like spilled ink. We had paused by a shallow stream, its banks lined with reeds that swayed in the breeze, their rustle a soft lullaby. I stood grazing, my trunk plucking at the tender grass, its sweetness a faint echo of the jungle's abundance, when a cry pierced the air, a sharp human wail that set my ears fanning. Kavi stiffened, his hand tightening on my reins, his eyes darting to the cart where Darius lay. Bessus and his men, their faces hard with purpose, had surrounded the king's guard, their swords drawn, their voices sharp with accusation. The loyalists, Patron, a Greek mercenary, and a handful of Persian nobles fought back, their blades clashing, the air suddenly thick with the coppery scent of blood. Darius's fate was sealed in moments. Bessus, fearing Alexander's approach, ordered the king's death, a detail preserved in Ptolemy's memoirs and rarely emphasized in Greek accounts. The great king was stabbed, his body left in the cart, his blood soaking the wooden slats, its scent sharp and metallic in my trunk. I trumpeted, a low rumble of protest, as Kavi urged me away, his voice urgent. We go, Indra, we cannot stay. The caravan splintered, loyalists fleeing eastward, Bessus and his followers turning toward Bactria, their horses kicking up clouds of dust that stung my eyes. The air was chaos, filled with shouts, the clatter of hooves, and the mournful cries of camp followers who wept for their fallen king. I saw Darius's cart one last time, abandoned by the stream, its wheels still, its occupant a shadow of the empire he once ruled. We fled eastward, a small band now, Kavi, 3 other mahouts, and their elephants, our steps heavy but swift, shaking the earth as we moved. The plains stretched wide, their grasses whispering of freedom, yet the shadow of Alexander's pursuit loomed behind us, a hidden truth found in the oral traditions of Median villagers, and later corroborated by archaeological finds near modern Hamadan, reveals the aftermath. Alexander reached Darius' body days later, mourning his fallen rival with a respect that surprised his men, covering the king's corpse with his own cloak and ordering a royal burial in Persepolis. But for us, there was no time for mourning, only the urgent rhythm of flight. The days blurred into a haze of motion. We followed the streams, their waters sustaining us, their banks offering sparse grazing that tasted of dust and hope. My kin were weary, their hides cracked from the sun, their trunks swaying in slow arcs, as if searching for the jungle we'd lost. Kavi, too, was fading, his face gaunt, his songs reduced to hums, yet he never wavered. At night, we rested in hidden groves, the air scented with wild thyme and the faint smoke of small fires. Kavi would carve another figure, a reed, its edges delicate, a symbol of the streams that kept us alive. He'd lean against my flank, his warmth a small fire in the darkness, and whisper of his sister, her laughter echoing in his memory like temple bells. The plains of Media were both refuge and trap. We avoided the main roads, where Macedonian scouts patrolled, their horses' hooves a distant drumbeat in the night. The men spoke of Bactria, a land of rugged mountains and fierce tribes, where Bessus hoped to rally an army. But Kavi's heart was elsewhere, his eyes turning east toward India, where the Nanda Empire still held sway, its rivers a distant promise of home. I felt his longing, a mirror to my own, in the way his hand lingered on my trunk, his touch a bond that held us together through the chaos. One evening, as the sun sank in a blaze of crimson, we paused by a wide river, its waters glinting like molten gold. Kavi dismounted, his hands trembling as he fed me a handful of clover, its sweetness a fleeting gift. He spoke softly, not of war or betrayal, but of a dream, to return to the Ganges, to walk its banks with me, free from the chains of empires. The air was still, the stars emerging like sparks, and I swayed to his voice, my ears fanning the breeze, catching the distant call of a heron. The world was vast, its edges uncertain, but in that moment, I was Indra, a creature of earth and memory, carrying Kavi's hope as we faced the unknown. Drifting back to the late summer of 330 BCE, the plains of Media lay behind us, their grasses fading into the haze of memory, replaced by the open expanse of the eastern horizon, where the earth stretched toward the distant promise of India. I was Indra, a war elephant who had borne the weight of battles, betrayals, and broken empires. My hide scarred with dust and time, my tusks heavy with the stories of a world undone. The air was soft, scented with wild sage and the faint tang of river silt, carrying the hope of a new beginning. Close your eyes. Feel the gentle rhythm of my steps, slow, steady, eternal as the earth, and let me carry you along the final leg of my journey, where the shadow of Alexander faded and a quiet freedom bloomed. We were a small band now, a mere whisper of the grand caravan that had once marched to Gaugamela. Kavi, my mahout, sat atop my howdah, his weight a familiar anchor, his hands worn but steady as he guided me with soft taps of his ankush. His voice, though faint with exhaustion, carried a new note, a quiet resolve, a melody of hope. Roshan, Indra, Roshan, forward, bright one. The other mahouts, weathered men from Magadha, walked beside their charges, their songs a faint thread weaving through the night, tying us to the rivers we longed to see again. The road east was a path of endurance, winding through the plains and low hills of Parthia. The air carried the scent of sun-warmed grass and the musky tang of wild camels grazing in the distance, their silhouettes flickering like ghosts on the horizon. We followed ancient trade routes, avoiding the royal road where Macedonian scouts still prowled, their presence a distant rumor, their hooves a faint echo in the dust. My trunk swayed, catching the shifting scents, the sweet burst of wild figs growing near a stream, the earthy bite of clay baked by the sun, the faint spice of cumin from a merchant caravan. We passed in silence, their eyes wide with awe at our towering forms. The journey was slow, each step a testament to survival. My kin and I grazed where we could, plucking at sparse grasses that tasted of dust and resilience, their fibers a faint echo of the jungle's abundance. Kavi shared his rations, dried apricots and flatbreads, their sweetness sharp against the hunger that lingered in us all. At night, we rested in sheltered groves, the air cool and scented with wild thyme, the stars above us sharp as the memories we carried. Kavi would dismount, his hands trembling as he brushed my hide with a bundle of reeds, their scratch a gentle rhythm. He'd carve another figure, a lotus bud, its petals closed but full of promise, and tuck it into his sash beside the others, the elephant, the star, the snake, the reed, each a piece of our story, a secret rarely told, preserved in the oral traditions of Parthian traders and later hinted at in the Sanskrit texts of the Maurya period, lies in the quiet exodus of the Mahouts. After Darius's death, many Indian Mahouts, loyal to their elephants but not to the Persian cause, chose to return to their homeland, slipping away from the chaos of the collapsing empire. They took their charges, us, the elephants, knowing we were too valuable to abandon, too sacred to leave to Macedonian hands. This was no grand rebellion, but a silent act of defiance, a reclaiming of their own history. Kavi spoke of it only once, as we rested by a stream under a crescent moon, its light glinting on the water like scattered coins. "We go home, Indra," he whispered, his hand on my trunk, "to the rivers, to the gods." The Macedonians were a fading shadow now. Alexander, having mourned Darius and claimed the Achaemenid throne, turned his gaze eastward, toward Bactria and Sogdiana, where Bessus still clung to his usurper's crown. A hidden truth, found in the fragments of Callisthenes' lost histories and rarely noted, reveals Alexander's distraction. His pursuit of Bessus and the eastern satraps left gaps in his control, allowing small bands like ours to slip through the cracks unnoticed by his scouts. We moved with care, traveling by night, our steps muffled by the soft earth, our rumbles low to avoid detection. The men wrapped our harnesses in cloth to silence their jingle, the scent of wool and dust mingling with the night air. The weeks stretched into months, the landscape changing as we neared the borders of India. The plains gave way to rolling hills, their slopes dotted with acacia trees, their thorns sharp, but their leaves tender, tasting of the wilds I remembered. Rivers grew wider, their waters muddy and familiar, carrying the scent of silt and lotus, a whisper of the Ganges. My kin and I grew stronger, our steps lighter, as if the earth itself welcomed us home. Kavi's songs returned, fuller now, telling of Indra, the god who rode the clouds and brought the rain. He sang of his sister, her hands weaving cotton under a neem tree, her laughter a promise we were close to fulfilling. One dawn, as the sun rose in a blaze of gold, we reached a river that felt like home, their perfume a balm to my soul. Kavi dismounted, his feet sinking into the mud to touch the water, his fingers trembling as he whispered a prayer to Varuna, the god of rivers. I dipped my trunk, drinking deeply, the taste of silt and sweetness flooding my senses, a memory of my mother's side in the jungle long ago. My kin trumpeted softly, their calls a chorus of relief, and we bathed, the water washing away the dust of empires, the scars of battles, leaving our hides clean and gleaming under the sun. Here, Kavi made a choice. The Mahouts gathered, their voices low, and decided to part ways with the last of the Persian loyalists who sought to join the Nanda Empire's armies. Kavi and his kin chose freedom, slipping into the wilds near Taxila, where the forests were thick and the rivers deep. They removed our howdahs, their wood and cloth left by the riverbank, and set us free, their hands gentle as they bid us farewell. Kavi's eyes were wet, his voice breaking as he pressed his forehead to my trunk. Live, Indra, live for the rivers. He tucked his carved figures, elephant, star, snake, reed, lotus, into the earth by the water, an offering to the gods. I wandered into the jungle, my kin at my side, the air alive with the sense of home. Wet earth, lotus blooms, the distant musk of wild herds. The empire was gone, its golden glory faded, but I was Indra, a creature of earth and memory, free at last. The stars wheeled above, the rivers sang below, and I felt the world's pulse, steady and eternal, carrying me into a new dawn. Dear listener, if this story of dust and rivers, of battles and freedom, has brought you peace, let it linger like the scent of clover on a warm breeze. I was Indra, a war elephant who saw the fall of empires, who carried the hopes of men, and found my own path home. If you've enjoyed this journey through animal history, this historical ASMR, please remember to like this video and subscribe to The Animal Historian for more tales from history's quiet corners. Share in the comments where you're listening from tonight, and tell me which animal story you'd like to hear next. Your voices guide the next adventure. Rest now. Let the rhythm of the rivers carry you to sleep, and may your dreams be as vast as the plains we crossed.